Leadership is a quality that's rather rare in many different situations. Folks are more inclined to follow than to actually step up and lead. Leadership requires certain abilities that not everyone has. Now, to a certain extent, we all have to exercise leadership at different points in life. We're leaders of our families. We are leaders of positions that we have on our jobs. We provide different kinds of direction and guidance to those who are around us. Sometimes we may not actually have the office or position of leader, but most folks look to us for providing leadership, particularly in difficult times. Leadership has a certain quality about it that sets itself apart. It has a certain vision for the future, an understanding of which way to go, a confidence in the direction that should be pursued. But leadership is more than simply an understanding of what's the right thing to do. Leadership is more than simply a vision for where to go. Leadership also involves the willingness to take upon oneself the responsibility to step ahead, to step forward, to go into the conflict or to go into the future, whether others will follow or not. That is leadership. That kind of leadership needs to be evident in political leaders, of course, military leaders, church leaders, but we all need to learn what it means to lead in our day and to serve in ways which honor the Lord. Joshua was a great example of a leader. He was one who had been Moses' understudy for a number of years, trained not so much to be a legislator or a lawgiver like Moses was, but more to be a warrior, the anointed of the Lord, empowered to lead the armies of Israel into battle. And so, at the beginning of the book of Joshua, we find the Lord instructing Joshua to be strong and courageous and to obey the Lord. And he would need that strength, he would need that courage for the life that was before him as he led Israel into battle. He would go off into Jericho and then the various cities of the land of Canaan against large armies, multiple kings and city-states, and have to confront them and to conquer them. We come to the end of Joshua's life here at the end of the book of Joshua, chapter 24, where Joshua is about to pass from this life. And he's looking ahead to the future. When he was under Moses, Moses looked ahead to the future, and he had Joshua to pick up the leadership, to pick up the mantle after him. I don't know that Joshua had an understudy beneath him to take up the leadership following him, other than the leaders of the tribes of the people of Israel who were gathered there before him. They, the multitude of these people, had to individually take it upon themselves to lead those who were under their care. So Joshua here sees an important moment in Israel's history. This is a pivotal moment when he will be passing, and he will no longer be around to provide the motivation, the guidance, direction, discipline to lead Israel to obey the Lord. He will be passing on. Who will follow the Lord after he is gone? And so what he does is he leads. He calls the congregation together at a unique spot, a place called Shechem. If you recall, Shechem was rather unique in Israel's history. When they gathered there would be all kinds of memories of their history echoing around that area. Shechem was where God first brought Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 and gave him the promise that he would bless him and prosper him. Shechem would be the place where Jacob would bring his family from Laban's household, and there they would bury the household idols that Rachel had hidden from Laban's house. There they would be put aside. Shechem was an important place in Israel's history. And so Joshua brings them to this location so that the memories that were incorporated in that place would add strength and force to the appeal he is going to make to Israel. What is more, he does not merely make use of atmospherics, the backdrop of that location. He also uses a recollection of God's dealings with his people throughout their history to provide a motivation for them to do what he wants them to do. He reminds them in the earlier part of this chapter, the second half of verse 2 through verse 13, of the wonderful displays of God's grace on their behalf. How God, first of all, took Abraham, who was living in the land of Canaan, the land of Chaldea. His father, Terah, was one who served the idol gods of Chaldea. Abraham grew up in that household, had no knowledge of the true God, except God revealed himself to Abraham. Abraham would have been just like his father Terah and others there in Chaldea. But God chose Abraham and brought him to the land of Canaan, revealing himself to Abraham, making a covenant with Abraham. God delivered him from the idols of Chaldea. God blessed Abraham. And then as Abraham's descendants grew and multiplied, they went down into Egypt, and God also looked with favor upon Israel, Abraham's descendants, and brought them up out of Egypt, delivered them out of the land where there were so many gods there in Egypt, and brought them to himself. And so in verses 2 through 8, we see God's wonderful works of grace in delivering his people out of the darkness of idolatry and bringing them to himself. God's wonderful works of grace given to Israel were designed to motivate them to honor and serve the Lord. Would it not be good for us as we begin a new year to think about what ways God has shown his grace to us, how he has delivered us from the darkness of sin, wickedness, and evil? Perhaps we have grown up in families that did not confess the Lord, and we ourselves were spared. We ourselves were brought to a knowledge of the true God. Can you not think of God's wonderful work of grace in your life in bringing you to himself, revealing his ways, his truth, his salvation, giving you everlasting life, when perhaps many in your family or many in your community know nothing about these things and continue on in their ways? Think of your deliverance and what God has done for you. Should you not serve him? Joshua then goes on in the 9th verse to talk about the ways in which God protected his people from spiritual influences that were around them. They faced the Amorites and the Moabites, and Joshua reminds them of Balak, who hired Balaam to curse Israel. Balak saw that Israel was coming his way, and he was very concerned about the power of this nation, the power of its God over it. And so he wanted to bring a curse upon these people, recognizing that there was more involved than just simply the military force of these people. There were spiritual forces at work, and so he tried to counter that with Balaam, this curse. But God protected Israel and turned Balaam's curses into blessings. And Balaam had to bless Israel again and again and again. And do you not know of ways in which you anticipated curse and trouble, and yet God in some way brought blessing into your life? You anticipated trouble from those who were around you, those in your family, those at the job, and yet nonetheless God continued to show his favor to you. Even in difficult circumstances where there were disappointments, you found afterwards that there was blessing and joy in God's provision. Think of what God has done for you in the various ways he has been gracious to you. Well, after describing these great works of protection, Joshua then goes on to talk about how God provided for his people. When they entered into the land of Canaan, they faced various city-states, cities all walled and armed armed to the teeth. And yet Israel went through there and conquered these various nations. They then inhabited their cities, inherited their lands, prospered from their fields. The whole thing was laid out for Israel. And you find here as you go through this section from verse 2 to verse 13, that time and time again, God says, I am the one who delivered you from Egypt and from your gods. I am the one that protected you from Balaam's curses. I am the one that brought you into the land of Canaan and gave you homes to live in and fields to work and to prosper from. I did it all for you. You see what God does for us, not merely in these external ways in which He blessed Israel, but we ourselves in this day of redemption have far more to give thanks for in the way that God has blessed us, delivering us not just from idolatry in the past, but delivering us from sin and death itself, bringing us into the kingdom of God, a land far greater than the land of Canaan. And God did it all for us, such that we do not have to work for our salvation. He has provided a full and complete salvation in Jesus Christ. God did it all. He is sovereign in that whole work.